Okay, welcome to what will be the first recording in the sort of pedagogy series. Just doing this really for my own benefit and to share on the pedagogy book group if and when we get around to doing this. Um, and it's a fantastic book. It really is. Recommended it. Came across it on the Kate Jones Twitter feed. She's written the forward for it. So she was sort of promoting it, and as I'm personally aspiring to go into middle leadership myself, then this seemed like the perfect book to read. And by the sounds of things, the three authors, Bawden, Hickin and Macis-Riley, are roughly the similar kind of age and experience as I am. They seem to have sort of be the same generation of teacher that I was coming into the profession, sort of around about 2010, when things were very, very different, expectations were very different, and we'll sort of touch on that as we go through. And it was really uplifting to see that other people had been through the same kind of journey that I had, and encountered the same craziness that I have, and thinking roughly along the same lines as I am. So it was really good. I learned a few things, and it was also nice just to have some confirmation that I wasn't the only one that thought the early 2010s were absolutely bonkers in terms of teaching. So their whole thing is sort of ethical leadership, and the first chapter you can see here sort of they cover 10 core values or 10 key points that they think comprise ethical leadership. Most of these are sort of visited again during the book. Sort of highlights that I came up with were the idea of this value-driven decision making, the fact that you don't just have a mission statement that you plaster on the wall and then forget about, but it's something that you revisit and reflect on routinely. I think that's really, really important. And inside and outside of teaching, I've found that to be really beneficial myself. So that's something that I definitely thought had value. And this idea of radical candor, which we'll revisit when we get to the relevant slide. Respecting others, this idea, this chimed with me. This idea of shouting at staff in front of students. I'd like to say I haven't seen it, but I've seen it routinely. I've had it done to myself a couple of times. My first teaching placement, well, not placement actually, my NQT year. My head of department could have written the textbook on how not to do things, and so this is one of them. So basically, I made a slide per chapter here for the book. So this one I found particularly fascinating. The idea that obviously performance management should only be ever supportive. The idea that teachers to be graded once a year or 3 times a year on a one-off lesson observation seemed to me utterly insane when it was standard issue for every school, every British curriculum school in the land. And I remember being utterly frustrated with it, thinking, these are intelligent people. Why is everyone buying into what is quite clearly ludicrous? But anyway, it's nice that finally we've kind of come around to this idea that you can't judge a teacher's ability in just one lesson, and nor can you judge student progress in one lesson. I remember I went to an interview myself fairly 4 years ago, and was given that question: how do you show progress in a lesson? And I decided to be bold and say that you couldn't. That such a thing is impossible. It's a fallacy. You could create artificial targets for the students to then hit, but then, as this book goes on to explain, there's a difference between learning and performance, or remembering and performance. And I could get my children to, get my students to perform if that's what you want me to do. And I had these showcase lessons. Anyway, the head teacher at the time wasn't. I think misunderstood me. I obviously didn't make myself particularly clear. He interpreted it as me saying that my lessons were for show, and the point I was trying to make was that no, but any system where you judge teachers on a one-off lesson inevitably will be for show. And anyway, he didn't take that too kindly. But this third bullet point here, which is from a different text, but they quote it in the book, is phenomenal, and should be plastered on the front of every single school. And if we could go back in time, it would be fantastic. Using Ofsted's categories, if a lesson is judged outstanding by one observer, the probability that a second observer would give a different judgment is between 51 and 78%. I mean, it, just blows up 10 years of teaching right there. And this idea of agency over autocracy when it comes to getting teams involved in the process of judging themselves and advising each other. And thankfully, the school I'm at now, we do a really good job of sort of not having such formal observations. And to be fair, the school I was at in the UK before I left and moved out to the UAE, they were moving towards that model of we call them triads. I think most schools do this now, where you're groups of 3, and it was cross curricular. It actually worked out really well, and you pop in just for sort of 10-15 minutes, you pick out 1 or 2 really good things, and then you report them back to the person. It was all about being supportive, about promoting good practice, so that was really good to see. This I found fascinating because, like I said, I've not been in middle management. I was a data manager at a school once, in the sense that I was a teacher with a sort of portfolio for data management across the school, and we introduced a brand new system. So I had to deliver CPD and give advice on this, but I was never in a position really where I had to do difficult conversations. I was never anyone's line manager. I was just basically creating delivering a service for the school. So I've never had to really, in teaching, at least in my previous career, I touched on this a little bit, but never really in teaching have I had to have difficult conversations with anybody. It actually reminded me of some good practice that I'd seen by other teachers I've worked with. That they actually practice difficult conversations with other people before having them with the intended person, and this is fantastic because. I guess at the time perceived that as being uncertain and requiring like a confidence boost, and that might have been part of it. But actually, it's and this book picks it out. It's a really good technique for fine tuning what you're going to say, for anticipating any difficulties or comebacks, or flaws in your own logic that could be picked upon by the person you're having the conversation with. So that's worth noting, and I'll take that forward myself, definitely. But there's some really good ideas there that should be worked through. And the idea here towards the end, second from last there, that feedback should be immediate. I mean, I do believe that when it comes to learning with I had to re-record this bit. I didn't record my audio for the second half of this video, so I'm coming back to this point. Right, picking up where I just was, we were talking about feedback should be immediate, just like with the students, and 100% believe that. If it's more than 48 hours old, or then it's pointless. In a dream world, then I think teaching is best done where you teach something, you assess it, you act on that assessment to create the next lesson, and then you go around like in a virtuous cycle like that. Now, in reality, actually achieving that is very difficult because of time constraints. There are sort of workarounds. You can do whole class marking, taking a sample, blah blah blah. But even with those workarounds, it's exceptionally demanding and unrealistic, really. Technology helps, and I think eventually, as a profession, we will get there, but we're not there yet. It's beyond the realm of human capability. So we do need some good old AI to come in and rescue us on that one. Right. Curriculum development theory, and then the second chapter on curriculum development is about practice. What I thought was really important was about sequencing, how it's a team effort. You should sit around and decide what needs to be done and by what point, and what assessment comes into this as well later on, what you're judging when and why. I think this third bullet point here, I hadn't heard this phrase before, but this idea of threshold concepts, that in year 7 they need to do this X, Y, and Z in order to understand A, B, and C at year 8. And I absolutely love that quote that I've just put there in in bold. This second point here the second from bottom point in bold. Knowledge is to be taught, to be remembered, not merely encountered. And I think, in my career, even today, I am guilty of this at times when you're trying to pack in a lot of information, a lot of content to cover. You find yourself thinking, look, the students, they've seen the information on a whiteboard, they've written it down in their books, we've had a quick chat about it, they've encountered it, let's move on. And you think, well, hang on a minute, that's not great, because who's to say they've taken any of that in? I've got no way of knowing, really, up until the end of year exam, by which point it's too late. So really important there. Teaching and learning, this was mostly stuff that we know about, cognitive load theory being very vital. I hadn't really heard much use of these two phrases, declarative knowledge and procedural knowledge, but that kind of makes sense. Sort of facts and skills. This is crucial, I felt. Most schools I work at, and even the one I'm at now, we tend to use GCSE questions throughout Key Stage 3. And they make a very good point that GCSE questions are designed for students that have completed the GCSE course, and they have got a range of skills that they can bring to those questions. Our year 7, 8, and 9 students don't have those skills, or don't have the range of skills. And so it's unfair. And so it's a very good point. And they recommend breaking those skills down into much smaller segments and teaching those and assessing their ability on just that one little segment. So that's really important. Participation ratio, I can personally, and I think a lot of teachers are probably the same, you can never be reminded of this enough. If I'm having a bad day, if I'm lazy, if I'm hurried, I very quickly fall into the trap of having a conversation with only a handful of students, and kind of really nothing more than prayer to hope that the rest of them take on board important parts of it. Assessment, sort of touched on that a little bit in terms of not using GCSE standard for Key Stage 3. That fourth bullet point I think is really vital, using percentages. Like I said before, when I was working at my previous school and I was head of data and we had to create this data system, it wasn't just the mechanics of getting the data down, it was the philosophy behind it that basically senior team couldn't agree on, which caused me a lot of headaches because I had to go back and rewrite things. But we didn't know what assessment was for and who it was for. Apologies if you can hear someone dying in the background. That's my child, my 3-year-old trying to bedtime routine. And we've got, but I like this idea. Just a percentage. A percentage is so simple, so easy to do. It answers, everyone understands it. And if you can compare it to an average, I think it solves a lot of problems. You haven't got to sit there and explain, or you were 3 marks off the next grade, or people saying, "Oh, what's a 7?" Or why is my child not getting a 9? And then you having to say, "Well, no, 9s are reserved for like 1% of the population," and things like this. So that's a useful metric to be using, or a useful way to grade students. The other thing here was comparative judgment. My school has used this. We've trialed it. It did show some promise. We haven't really embedded it yet. I think that's what we're probably going to look at doing next year. It's got huge scope. I think once it's set up, it's one of those things. Once it's set up, it could save teachers time, but it's going to take a lot of setting up. If you haven't used it before, you don't know what it is, check out nomoremarking.com. It's a neat little technique where you have two assessments side by side, and you sort of make a quick judgment on which you feel is the best. And every teacher in the department does that over a set. And in so doing, you kind of rate, or you grade from top to bottom the assessments, and then they kind of set them. They get given a grade based on a kind of a bell curve type thing. And yeah, it's worth doing. Teaching to the top. Okay. one of my frustrations when I started in 2010 was that I did feel that we were all at the Bart Simpson School of Differentiation. If you don't know what I'm talking about, there's a fantastic episode of The Simpsons where Bart moves schools and he gets quickly put into the bottom set, and he goes up there, and I think they're playing musical chairs, and he says, like, why, hang on, the class I was just in, we were doing maths, and in this class we're playing musical chairs. How are we supposed to catch up by going slower than that other class? And that sort of has stuck with me. And when I went into teaching, and in vogue at the time was this idea that differentiation looked like having a diving board with some plonker jumping off the top and then some plonker jumping off from the bottom and then someone in the middle, and students would kind of self-differentiate by picking the task that they wanted, and you'd split the class in three, and you'd give a red worksheet to the thickos. It's not a technical term, that, but you'd give the red worksheet to the one to the bottom, and then you'd give a green worksheet to one to the top, and and you'd give. I'm using the word the thickos in jest, obviously, because you'd give them the red ones, and that would be their response. They'd be like, "Well, so we the thickos, are we?" And you're like, "No, no, 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 no. You're not the thickos. It's just that I'm being observed, and this is how we're meant to do it." It didn't, had no value at the time. It was self-evidently wrong, but we went along with it. And so this idea of teaching to the top is ideal. Yeah, and it's worth reading just to get your head around those, or to remind yourselves that this is what we should be doing. Behaviour management, fairly straightforward stuff. I've yet to work at a department in a school where there is consistency of approach across all teachers. I think in theory it's probably impossible. It's right, in practice it's impossible. Everyone's got their own sort of style. Everyone's got their own norms, and will accept different things on different days. And even individuals, depending on how they're feeling, will change their approach on a different day. And so it's difficult, but that's not to say it should not be strived for, because consistency is the perfect ideal that I don't think anyone's ever going to reach. But the more consistent you can be across a department, of course, the better it can be, and it allows students to increase behavior across the board, and allow students to feel comfortable and know what to expect when they go into a class, or even down a corridor. CPD and coaching. This bit I've highlighted in bold, I think, is vital, and I never, ever, ever want to find myself doing this to any of my colleagues. So often, even right up until recently, you've had a long, busy day at work, 6-period day, been on duty. You go to this after-school meeting, and then there's some cheery soul greeting you with a card sort activity and telling you to look where your name is on the wall to see what group you're in. You're like, no, 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 no. sorry, we've got a lot of stuff to do. Can we please skip the games and just cut to the chase? And it's so yeah, avoid condescending CPD techniques. Definitely is one that I picked out of the chapter and appreciated. Does make mention as well that CPD has changed since I started in 2010. You can now go online, and there are brilliant CPD sessions for free or for a small fee. You can get access to basically the best minds in the business, delivering anywhere between 10 and 60-minute CPD sessions. So, that's hugely powerful and transformational in the world of teaching, and should definitely be taken advantage of. We're no longer limited to the skill set of our teaching and learning coach in the school. We now have access to the best of the best, and we should make the most of it. Social media, there's a chapter in the book about sort of fairly standard stuff. Don't put your drunken pictures online, but also just how influential and important and beneficial education Twitter, or edu Twitter, edu Twitter, or whatever you want to call it, can be. There's a huge community out there, loads of people sharing resources, sharing ideas, so much so that it can make you feel inadequate. And I certainly get that feeling when I go online sometimes. It can feel a bit clicky. You get these different chats of people. Everyone seems to know each other. Why is no one talking to me? I've just posted something fantastic. Why is no one mentioning anything about me? So there is that sort of thing to be wary of. Positive disruption is what they talk about in the book, where they might say something like upward management. It's the idea that middle managers are there to challenge senior team, but and also to guide those beneath them. And yeah, that's hugely important. I've said here that basically middle leaders are the NCOs of the teaching world. If you've got any experience with the sort of military side of things, you'll know that nothing can happen unless you've got good NCOs, yeah, the non-commissioned officers, not the officers themselves. They represent the SLT in this case, and not necessarily the guys at the bottom end. They represent the teachers, but those guys in the middle, the guys that link the two, hugely important. The NCOs, or the middle managers. Also important that middle managers are not to become carrier pigeons. I have worked for a few that are like this, where effectively they don't want to upset those beneath them and they don't want to upset those above them, and so they just end up basically running messages between the two sets, between teachers and SLT, again, well, they said this, or they've said this, or they've said this. No, you're a middle leader, you're educated, you're experienced, and you're paid there to do analysis and to make judgment calls and to take decisions, and so that's really important. Although, don't get me wrong, I completely understand the incentives are in place there not to upset, particularly those above you. So yeah, no, genuinely, it's a really, really good book. I hope the audio is recorded this time. Otherwise, I've just been talking into the air. I would recommend this book not just for people like myself that are looking to enter middle management, but for those that are just starting out on their NQTs, because you can learn so much about what is expected of a history department, which then lets you know how you fit in. I always find that very beneficial to know what the world looks like in the next rung above you, if that makes sense, because then you can anticipate and predict demands that are going to be made of you. And so hugely beneficial, and it touches on a whole range of really good teaching techniques. You can learn a lot about how to teach in your classroom from this book, as well as the expectations of middle management. So could not recommend enough.